we are the only advanced country on earth that sees this kind of mass violence erupt with this kind of frequency.
Opened fire at a high school just outside of Denver.
Deadly mass shooting in a Southern California bar.
At least 12 people have been killed.
At least 58 people now dead. More than 500 people wounded in a horrific shooting on the Las Vegas Strip.
Terrified witnesses describing the horror of hearing the gunshots, seeing people injured during the chaos.
It's the deadliest mass shooting in modern United States history.
Guns, a staple in American culture, an innovation deeply intertwined into the history of our country. A symbol of freedom and protection, now turned into a symbol of hate and violence. Every day, 96 Americans are killed by guns, and nearly 1,600 children and teens are killed by guns each year. This makes it the second leading cause of death in children and teens in the United States, only behind suicide. Approximately 44% of American adults report knowing someone who has been shot, and nearly 25% report that they or someone in their family have been threatened or intimidated by someone using a gun. Nearly 3 million children witness gun violence each year. It wasn't always like this. When it was first created, it gave many advantages to whoever wielded it, and it looked to help propel Americans into the future. To fully understand the gun we see today, we have to look back at its history.
Began in 9th century China, and in the 10th century the Chinese fire lance was developed. This weapon was known as the first gun created and paved the path for the evolution of guns as well as the development of advanced weapons throughout China. From 1200 to 1600, the development of firearm technology spread like wildfire. During the 13th century, gunpowder was transferred to Europe over the Silk Road trade routes of Asia. Europeans refined the gunpowder, created a mixture of saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur. In the mid-15th century, the first reliable handgun was invented. This gun was called the arquebus and was created by the French. During the 17th century, colonists came to the New World in America and firearms were brought with them. The American gunsmiths became a vital part of early settlements and North American pioneering. During this time, the American long rifle, also known as the Ohio, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania rifle, was created. During the Revolutionary War, American militia used guerrilla-style fighting to take out British soldiers with hunting rifles. The Continental Army mainly used a combination of the British Brown Bess and French Charleville musket. The demand for guns from the Continental Army was so high that American gunsmiths began to make their own European-style muskets. 1835, an American inventor, Samuel Colt, patented a revolving gun, renamed the Colt revolver, which improved on several previous designs. Colt was the first firearm inventor to apply industrial-age machinery for the invention of the Colt revolver. 1851 to 1861, the first machine gun was invented. The Bellingham's Army multiple-barreled machine gun was soon followed by the Gatling gun. The Gatling gun was the first gun that could be continuously fired.
The first fully automatic machine gun was invented in 1884 during World War II. Created by Hiram Stevens Maxim, it became known as the Maxim gun. It could fire 600 bullets in a minute by simply holding down the trigger. This revolutionized warfare, and as the war progressed, so did their technology. By the end of the war, machine guns were fully automated without having to be hand-cranked. As technology advanced, a new kind of semi-automatic gun known as the AR-15 had come into the spotlight. These guns were made by Colt, a gun manufacturer. Colt began by making guns for American soldiers in the Vietnam War, but began selling semi-automated ones to the public. This gun could have caused a rise in mass shootings, so the question of gun legality was brought up. While many pro-gun Americans argue that owning a gun is a constitutional right given to us by the Founding Fathers, this claim was based on the technology they had in their time, when the most common type of gun was a musket, which could fire 3 rounds a minute. The AR-15 can fire 45 rounds a minute. This is a massive difference compared to the musket.
On the morning of April 20th, 1999, American history would be forever changed by a mass shooting that shook the nation. Two teenagers entered Columbine High School in Colorado wearing trench coats and carrying duffel bags. Within those bags held propane bombs set to blow up the school cafeteria and everyone inside. When the bombs didn't detonate, the teens, who were 17 and 18 years old, began shooting. They chose their victims randomly, and in the end, 19 people were killed and 20 more left wounded. This sparked the national debate over gun control laws and school safety. Lots of Americans believe gun control laws should be enacted, but there were still many people hesitant to give up their rights, and maybe for good reason. They argue that guns are needed for protection because we can't trust the government to protect us. A study sponsored by the U.S. Department of Justice found that nearly 80% of felons claimed that they intentionally avoided people and homes they believed to be armed, and 63% of Americans believe that having a gun in the house increases safety. Today, guns have been ingrained into American culture, and many people see guns as a symbol of maturity and status. We talked with Laura Hogue, a criminal defense attorney. She represents people who have been accused of crimes, from small thefts and forgeries to sex crimes and all the way up to multiple murders. We also spoke to her son TJ, who is a gym owner, real estate investor, and combat veteran. We asked them the following questions. What are your opinions on how relatively easy it is for Americans to purchase guns?
Based on my experience, I don't believe the purchase process is easy when buying new or from a gun store. I think the ball is being dropped when used firearms are transferred in the open market from one owner to another.
2. Do you think it is necessary for people to have guns in their homes for self-protection and hunting, or can it do more good than harm?
I don't think it makes sense for a person to have a gun for protection in his or her home. In my experience, in the relatively rare situation where someone breaks into another person's home to harm the occupants, it is pretty unlikely that the homeowner could access his weapon in time to stop the assault. What I see more often for people who have a handgun at home is that the weapon is available to the owner when it really shouldn't be, when he or she is intoxicated or angry, and the presence of the weapon turns what might otherwise have been just a bad argument into a murder.
Yes, without a doubt, I believe it's impossible to measure the harm versus good unless firearms were taken away. As cliche as it sounds, I honestly believe that the security of America's freedom relays on each citizen having the right to bear arms. Without this freedom, think of how easily we could fall back under some type of tyranny. I also see the thought that of a homeowner having a firearm as a barrier of security and protection by itself. I accept that there will be harm by negligence and unthinkable accidents. I think this harm can be mitigated if firearms are properly secured and kept away from those who are not responsible enough to have it.
What type of guns, if any, do you think people should be allowed to own?
No civilian should be able to own an assault rifle or any kind of fully automatic firearm. There is no good purpose for them, and they are the lethal force behind massive, violent shootings that couldn't have been achieved with any other kind of gun that requires you to pull the trigger for each bullet to fire. For those who disagree with me and believe that they do need a gun at home for protection, they should be allowed to purchase a small handgun after background checks that confirm no history of domestic violence or mental illness and completion of a gun safety course.
Do you believe we should have stricter gun laws, and why do you believe that Americans have been against enforcing stricter gun laws?
The majority of Americans are in favor of stricter, wiser gun control measures. What is stopping legislation to achieve those laws is the power and control of the National Rifle Association and other pro-gun lobbying groups. In 2010, the United States Supreme Court issued a terrible decision which allows nearly unlimited political campaign spending by organizations that seek to influence the voting decisions of the candidates that they support. So, if you're running for Congress and you need a ton of money to run your campaign, and the National Rifle Association, who has a ton of money, pours that money into your campaign, it becomes pretty difficult, if you get elected, to push legislation that seeks to impose gun control, especially if you hope to seek re-election and go back to the NRA for more dough for your re-election campaign.
I believe something must be done to stop this increased school and mass shootings. It's so frustrating, and I think the reason changes to gun laws have not been made because there's controversy on whether or not that will actually do anything to solve the problem. I do support registering all firearms nationally and stopping the open market. There are so many firearms in our country, and if we know, no matter what we do, laws, legislations, background checks, bans, the bad guys will have the guns, and I just want the good guys to have one too.
A series of recent mass shootings has caused a lot of Americans to question our country's relationship with a gun. A statistic from CNN showed that the United States have had 57 times as many school shootings as all other industrialized nations combined, and 6 times more than all nations in the world combined. Our nation has gone through 288 school shootings since 2009. The second most in this category is Mexico, who have had 8. The gun control debate has only recently become a very pressing issue in our country, though people have been fighting the use of guns for much longer. Many anti-gun protesters have looked at other countries as examples of gun laws that have successfully been enacted. The Australian government paid citizens to give up their guns after a mass shooting in 1996 and have not had another one for 22 years. In Britain, the private ownership of handguns was banned, as well as all semi-automatic weapons, after one school shooting in 1996. People from Iceland and Japan have to go through a series of training and tests for access to a gun. Though it is impossible to imagine our country's history without the presence of guns, we seem to have come to a point where action needs to be taken
to protect the lives of our citizens.
The innovation that revolutionized warfare and mankind is now being used to kill people daily. It was a powerful invention, but only when its use is regulated.
In today's age, many Americans wonder, how many more lives have to be lost before change is finally made?